Привет! You've already learned how to introduce yourself in Russian and how you can write your name with Cyrillic letters. And today we'll get into more detail about common Russian names. You'll find out that there are different ways to call the same person in Russian, and it will depend on whether you're talking to your friend, your partner, your neighbor, or your boss, for example. You'll also see how you might be mispronouncing some common Russian names, and you'll find out why it happens. Поехали!
Меня как только не называли. И Жора, и Юра, и Гоша, и Гога, Георгий Иванович.
Это интересно.
This is a scene from a famous Russian movie, Moscow Doesn't Believe in Tears. By the way, it even got an Oscar in 1980 as the best foreign language film. So, there is something funny going on when the character says, "People call me by so many different names. Жора, Юра, Gosha, Goga, Georgi." Is he trying to hide his identity? The thing is, almost all Russian names have a full form and one or even more shorter forms. Just like some English names. For instance, if you have a friend Catherine, you may be calling her Kate or Kathy. Or if it's a guy, David, you may be calling him Dave, and so on. Most of the times, it happens to longer names. In the example from the movie, the character's name is Georgi. This name has the same origin as the English George. In Russian, Georgi is a full name, and it has various shorter forms: Yegor, Gosha, Zhora, and so on. Let me give you some more not obvious examples. How many names do you see here? There are 5 Russian names here, and the rest are just variations. The name Alexander is pretty common in many languages. And if you have a Russian-speaking friend whose name is Alexander, you're probably calling him Alex. But in Russia, short for Alexander is Sasha or Shura. This name is common for girls too. The full name will sound slightly different, Alexandra, and short forms will sound just the same, Sasha, Shura. Alexei is a totally different Russian name. Common short names for it are Alyosha or Lyosha. Vladimir. Right, not Vladimir, but Vladimir. The stress goes on D. I'll explain it very soon. Vova and Volodya are common short forms for this name. Zhenya is short for Yevgeny, or Yevgenia if it's a girl. And Slava is a short form for Vyacheslav. There are many more examples. Let's just look at this chart. Ivan, Vanya, Vasily, Vasya, Fyodor, Fedya, Pyotr, Petya, Mikhail, Misha, Dmitry, Dima, Viktor, Vitya, Pavel, Pasha, Stanislav, Stas, Yuri, Yura, Anatoly, Toля, Nikolai, Коля, Константин, Костя, Григорий, Гриша, Валерий, Валера, Валентин, Валя, Роман, Рома, Борис, Боря, Леонид, Леня, Сергей, Андрей, Олег, Илья, Артем, Денис, Максим, Антон, Игорь, Никита, Кирилл. And girl names: Natalia, Natasha, Irina, Ира, Татьяна, Таня, Анна, Аня, Анастасия, Настя, Ольга, Оля, Мария, Маша, Светлана, Света, Екатерина, Катя, Елизавета, Лиза, Елена, Лена, Юлия, Юля, Дарья, Даша, Оксана or Ksenia, Ксюша, Валерия, Лера, Софья, Соня, Виктория, Вика, Вероника, Ника, Лариса, Лора, Тамара, Тома, Полина, Поля, Людмила, Люда, Валентина, Валя, Нина, Марина, Жанна, Анжела, Вера, Надежда, Надя, Любовь, Люба. Most male names in full forms end with a consonant in Russian, while most female names in full forms would end with a vowel a or ya, and most short forms for both male and female names would also end with a or ya in Russian. Now, you won't be surprised when you hear how somebody calls your friend Alex as Sasha. But there's even more to that. It's very common to use diminutives for Russian names, especially when talking to kids or your loved ones. For example, in English, you say Billy instead of Bill or William, or mommy and daddy for mom and dad is another example. In Spanish, it's saying Rosita instead of Rosa, gatito instead of gato, and so on. In Russian, you'll be saying, for example, Сашенька, Сашуня, Светочка, Светик, Танечка, Танюша, Ирочка, Иришка, Вовочка, Ванечка, Пашенька, Антошка, Сережа. I hope you get the idea. When Russian speakers introduce themselves in English, they tend to use their full names: Ivan, Denis, Boris. I'm pretty sure you've heard these names before, but if you're an English speaker, you're probably saying them as Ivan, Denis, and Boris. It's because if we just replace each Cyrillic letter with the closest Latin letter, we're not taking reading rules into account. If we do, we could write these names like this, for example. Now, they sound a little more like an original: Ivan, Denis. But we have another problem here. Now, for an English speaker, they resemble common female names too much. The same happens to the Russian male name Valery. For an English speaker, it makes more sense to read it as Valerie. So it's just something to remember. In Russian, these names sound as Ivan, Denis, Valery. And how about these names? I bet you've been reading them as Boris, Oleg, and Igor. But in Russian, you read these names differently from the way they're spelled. Why? Because in all of them, O is not stressed. And what does it mean? Right, you read it as A. Boris, Oleg, Igor. And one more. What is the name of the Russian president? Is it Vladimir or Vladimir? Vladimir? English and Russian have very different reading patterns. We tapped into that a bit in one of the previous videos. It almost doesn't matter how you write it in English. An English speaker will tend to pronounce it as Vladimir or Vladimir because Vladimir just doesn't sound right in English. So again, remember that in Russian, you read this name with a stress on the second syllable. Vladimir. Wait, so this is the Russian president, and this is the Ukrainian president. Now a question. Do they have the same or different first names? Their first names are the same. How come? It's because the Russian president's name is a translation from Russian, and the Ukrainian president's name is a translation from Ukrainian. Both of these languages use the Cyrillic alphabet, and in Ukraine, most people speak both Ukrainian and Russian. So, in Russian, the first names of both presidents will sound just the same. Vladimir. Moving on. Now, when you're talking to an older person in Russian or to someone in a superior position, you can't just call them by their first name. You'll be using their full first name and their patronymic name. A patronymic name is a father's name. It will look like this: Fyodor Mikhailovich. It will mean Fyodor, the son of Mikhail, or Ivan Alexandrovich. Ivan, the son of Alexander. Dmitry Sergeyevich. Denis Andreyevich. And so on. Russian male patronymic names usually end with Ovich or Yevich. Russian female patronymic names end with Ovna or Yevna. Compare these: Anna Alexandrovna, Maria Viktorovna, Tatiana Alexeyevna, Irina Evgenievna. Sometimes in conversational speech, patronymic names get reduced, and you can hear Ivan Ivanich instead of Ivan Ivanovich, or Marivanna instead of Maria Ivanovna. Remember, we talked about reduction of syllables in Russian. If not, check out the video I mentioned earlier. And that's not it yet. A full Russian name consists of 3 parts: surname, first name, and patronymic name. Usually in this order too. Russian surnames also have genders. Here are some typical and famous male surnames in Russian: Ivanov, Zhukov, Lomonosov, Timofeyev, Pushkin, Gagarin, Putin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Brodsky. And here are some common and famous female surnames in Russian: Pavlova, Tsvetaeva, Kurnikova, Panina, Larina, Karenina, Plisetskaya, Kovalevskaya. Of course, there are more particular surnames in Russian, but endings like these are the most common. So, when talking to your friend, you'll be using their first name in a short form, as a rule. Vasya, Petya, Lena, Natasha. If you're talking to your boss, your doctor, or your older neighbor, you'll be using their full first name and their patronymic name. Vasily Petrovich, Natalia Mikhailovna. And for instance, when filling out any forms, Russians have to write their surname, first name, and patronymic name in full. Here is an example. FIO is an abbreviation for familia, имя, отчество. Surname, first name, patronymic name. So a full Russian name will look like that: Sharapova Maria Yuryevna, or Putin Vladimir Vladimirovich. And by the way, in Russian, there is no such thing as a middle name. And one more thing. If you, as a foreigner, are going to fill any form in Russian, you don't need to write your father's name there. You just have to write your surname for familia and your first name in the field имя. That's it for today. I hope now you have more understanding about how Russian names work. Пока! Скоро увидимся!